Thanks everyone. I'll just put a timer on so I don't get too far off track with my timing. I really want to try and give you a bit of a deeper dive into the lake. Everyone gets to see the lake from the shoreline, maybe go for a swim every now and then. But there's a whole lot of stuff going on inside the lake that I think is very interesting. And also stuff that the lake is actually contributing to beyond the thing. I didn't ask for a slide progression clicker. Do we have one of those? You'll do it? Okay, I'll just give you a bit of a... so we'll move on. Yeah, so I just wanted to start with this slide, which is just the map of the lake. And the reason why I wanted to show that slide was because it really shows you the different parts of the lake, and to the sort of unknown looker of the lake, they might not realise that there's a whole bunch of things going on there, like there's a filtration system in the lake that circulates the water through wetlands to filter out all of the dirt and muck that's in the water, and when we swim in there we stir things up. And you'll notice sort of at the end of a nice day of swimming, it can be, you have a little bit of colour to it. By the next morning it's crystal clear again. And that's largely due to the way that the water's circulated through the lake. It has a lot of shallow areas, it has some really deep areas, and that was all designed by the person who designed this, Patrick Henley from Waterscapes Australia. And it was to enable different fish, plants and other animals to live in different parts of the lake. So I'll talk a little bit about those during my talk today. I just wanted to also mention that the name Gkula, if anyone wasn't aware, is actually Jinibara for koala. And so it's Lake Gkula because it's named in honour of Uncle Noel Blair, who is, everyone pretty much knows Uncle Noel. And just in terms of its size, you can see it's pretty big, but if you think about just how much water is in that lake, it works out to about 240 typical backyard swimming pools of water in that lake. So it's a huge volume of water. And that's because of those deep areas that you don't see from the surface. There's a lot of water in that lake. We've got a next slide. So I just wanted to touch on some of the plants that live in the lake, and you'll see a lot of these around the edge of the lake. And they're all different, have different roles, they grow differently. Some flower with really obvious flowers like the water lilies, you'll see those during summer particularly. A whole bunch of different reeds that grow out of the ground, emergent from the water. They're all part of this filtration process that the lake has. But there's also some underwater plants in the lake that you don't often get to see unless you do actually bob your head underwater and with a mask or a snorkel. And there's one plant in particular that I wanted to highlight because it will come back to that during the talk. It's an underwater plant called, some people call it eelgrass or ribbonweed. It's a native Australian plant, and it grows very prolifically on the bottom of the lake. And if you're swimming in the lake and walking through shallow parts, you'll actually step on some of that plant. It's a very soft plant, but it can be a bit strange to the unaware of what they're touching when they're going in the water. I'll just show a video of that plant underwater, just to show you how much of this stuff grows in the bottom of the lake. So this is just a GoPro camera underwater, swimming from the island across to the waterfall. And you can see this is the plant here, this sort of thin-leafed plant that grows off the bottom. And it gets really thick, and that's what it naturally does. It grows and it fills covers the bottom of the water body that it's growing in. So there's plenty of it there, and it keeps growing. It's getting thicker and thicker and spreading to more areas. And some of the projects that we do is the Lake Lovers Pod is actually try and manage this plant around the popular swimming parts so that people don't get too concerned about it touching their feet. And you can see in the video here there's these mats, these black plastic mats, and we're using those just like you would trying to suppress weeds in a garden. We put these mats down and leave them there for a couple of months, and they smother out the plant. It dies off, and then we move the mats to a new spot. So it's a really efficient way to keep the weed away from those really popular swimming areas so people can swim over to the waterfall or walk around that area without this plant sort of touching them, because it will grow to the surface in about 2 or 3 metres of water. Next slide. So this is sort of my passion. I'm a fish scientist, and I wanted to just touch on a few of the fish, not all of them, but just some of the key ones that you might see swimming around the edges. But you really don't get to see a lot of these until you actually look underwater. Some of them will sort of flee away from you if you're too close to them. And even just looking into water, you can't really see these fish as clearly as if you were underwater having a look at them. So if you ever get a chance to bring a snorkel and mask out, definitely give it a go, because it's a different world altogether. So there's a range of different fish here. I actually was listening to some people in the crowd earlier on, and they were talking about fish that might nip them on the toes or something as they walk around. And there's one particular fish, I haven't got a pointer, but it's in the middle on the bottom. It's that kind of silvery, spotty looking fish. It's called an eel-tailed catfish. And why it nips people every now and then is it actually builds a little nest of stones in spring usually, and then it guards that nest. So if you walk too close to it, it'll actually come out at you and give you a little nip to tell you to go away. This is where my nest is. So it can't hurt you. It doesn't have sharp teeth, but it does give people quite a shock. And one of our projects in the future is we might mark those nests with some floats or something like that, so people know they're there and can just avoid that area so that they don't get nipped and don't interfere with the nest. There's another fish. So these fish range in size from very, very small to a few centimetres up to our biggest fish, which I'll talk about in a minute. But there's one big fish there, the one up in the top left, the Mary River cod. And it's actually, there was a cod just like that fish in the Brisbane River and up the Stanley, so part of this catchment that we're in. But we believe it became extinct after a lot of dirty water events during sort of post-war clearing, fires and all that sort of thing. So there's some projects going on to bring that fish back to this catchment, and it's very closely related to the Mary River cod, which is in a catchment just north of us here around Gympie. So there's a couple of those fish, and they're quite large fish. They'll grow to about a metre 20, and very big and round. So you might notice there's a few logs and hollows in the lake. That was built specifically for those to hide in. That's what they like to live in. So the lake provides all of these fish a really nice place to live. Some of them breed in the lake on their own, others have to be added to the lake, but generally they're very happy in this lake environment because of all the plants and all the variation in the water depth and things like that. But the fish I really wanted to highlight today, as my title suggests, is the lungfish. So that's it there. I don't know if many people have seen a lungfish before or know much about lungfish, but they're quite an amazing animal. This is just a little one, but they get really large, like they can get to about 1.2 metres, some say up to 1.5 metres, and they can weigh about 20 kilos at that size, so they're about the size of a sort of a 10-year-old child just about, and they live for a long time, so they believe these lungfish can live for about 70 or 80 years in the wild, and in captivity potentially over 100 years. So those lungfish that live in the lake, I've got a video next to show, shortly to show you, could well be there for the next 100 years. So it's quite an amazing fish to think that it's going to survive for that long. I just got a few facts on the lungfish. So it's a protected species. It's under threat by a number of problems in their natural environment. So they're listed under different legislation to protect them, to make sure that they're not harmed any further. And they don't occur very widely. That map shows you roughly the two rivers that they mainly live in, which is the Mary River just north of us here, and the Brisbane River catchment, which includes the Stanley just over to the back of Woodford here. And there's a few other small spots where they do occur, but they're the main populations in those two rivers. So out of the whole of Australia, they're only really occurring in two. Oh, I forgot the Burnett River, which is just north of the Mary as well. So those three rivers is where they mostly live. So it's not a huge area that they occur in, but they're doing pretty well there, but they do have those threats. And the main thing is the disruption to their breeding habitat. So I'll talk a bit about that. They have very specific breeding habitat, and when that's impacted, they start to struggle and we can start to have some effects. So conserving these fish is all about the breeding habitat. Next slide. So some people might say, well, it's just a fish like any other fish really, isn't it? Well, no, it's not. It's quite an amazing species of animal. People call them fish, but they're actually more like land animals a la humans than they are to fish. They're more closely related to us than they are to most fish that you'll see swimming around in the water. And the reason that is because lungfish as a group, so a fish that developed lungs, first appeared in the fossil record about 400 million years ago. I'm too sure to a lot of people, what does that even mean? Well, that's pre-dinosaurs. So lungfish were around before all land animals occurred. And it's because of lungfish, because of the development of their lung and a few other features, that led to the progression of land animals. Just to think about that for a moment is quite phenomenal. The Australian lungfish, so the one that's swimming in the lake here, it's one of the oldest living species of animal that we have in the world. And what that means is that the lungfish you see today was swimming around in the waters of the world pretty much as it looks today, with dinosaurs. So it actually was living with real live dinosaurs 100 million years ago, and it survived all of the extinction events, all the other things that led to the loss of large sort of reptilian type dinosaurs. It persisted. So what you see swimming around today was essentially the same fish 100 million years ago. So just to think about that is quite amazing, because no other animal has really done that. They all evolve, they all change for whatever reasons, but this fish has remained pretty much the same. And the fact that if it wasn't for lungfish evolving lungs and other features that I'll mention in a minute, there wouldn't have been the progression of animals from the sea onto the land. So you had the age of fishes where everything was just fish in the water, and then you had the progression of animals leaving the oceans, going on to land. And if it wasn't for things like lungs and other features, that couldn't have happened. So I just highlighted on that graph there, essentially you can see down the bottom of that sort of tree of evolution, you've got development of lungs was the first key change. Then you've got the development of limbs. So the other unique feature about lungfish is their fins aren't like a normal fish. They're actually like fleshy, almost like hands. And the bones in those fins are mapped to bones that we have in our own arms and legs. So it was the development of those fins that enabled them to eventually develop legs as land animals progressed out of the water. And then there was a few other things like the development of eggs and things like that, which came later. But that's why, in essence, they're more closely related to us than they are to most other fish in the oceans, because they developed, and a shared ancestor of the lungfish evolved into essentially all the land animals, including us. Next slide. So some of those specific things that make them so unique to all other what you think of as fish, and that sort of makes you realise why they're a little bit more like an animal, a land animal, than a fish, is obviously they have the lungs, so they have both gills and lungs. So if it gets a bit nasty in the water and there's no oxygen, they can just come up and breathe air and take in oxygen just like all land animals do. So obviously without a lung you can't come out of the water and evolve onto land. They have those limbs I mentioned, so that instead of just thin fins that you would think of a normal fish, these are like bony projections of arms and legs. Their eyes are also uniquely adapted where they can actually see an extra colour spectrum than we can. So they can actually see UV, which is probably quite important for them trying to hide from predators and things in the water, if they can see UV and hide from bright areas. And they also have a kidney-like organ, which is more closely related to our kidneys than fish have. And that might sound a bit weird. What does that matter? Well, kidneys are essential for animals to come out of the water and live on the land, because they can't just excrete their waste like a fish does, which is just pee constantly to get rid of their waste. They have to conserve water. So a kidney enables you to excrete your waste without wasting water. And they were the first animals to have that kidney function. They also have enamel on their teeth, which is very, very unique. No other fish really has enamel. So enamel is what we have on our teeth, that hard coating that enables us to eat hard things like, you know, animals eating grass. Without enamel, your teeth would wear down and you wouldn't be able to eat anything. So they're the first animals to have an enamel on their teeth as well. And so all of those things are what were required for animals to move from the oceans to the land during evolution. The other strange thing about them is they have the Australian lungfish has the second largest genome of any animal in the world, and the record taker is another species of lungfish. And just to give you an idea of size, they have a 43 billion base pair genome, whereas we as humans only have 3 billion. So it's an amazingly large genome. And the theory is that that enabled the rapid evolution of animals with all this genome to work with. Things could change really rapidly and enable that to happen. When I say rapidly, we're not talking like thousands of years, we're talking in the hundreds of millions of years. So that genome potentially is what led to the enablement of evolution onto the land. So there's a whole bunch of other things I could talk about. Their scales are interesting, their body tissues, their digestive system, all of these things are just so unique to this fish that no other fish has, and that's what makes them more like a human than a fish. The fact that they are living in Lake Gkula here and you can go and see them is just an absolutely amazing opportunity that most people don't get to see. To see these in the wild, you have to get into the rivers and hunt around for a while and really sort of spend a lot of time there. So I'll just show a video next of our Lake Gkula lungfish when they were first released back in 2020 as tiny little sort of 25 centimetre babies, about a year and a half old. This is Patrick Henley who built the lake. He went and got these from a certified hatchery up near Karoi, and we released 3 of these into the lake back in 2020. You can see they're quite patterned and quite marked as juveniles. It's probably a camouflage type of response. But the other thing is they just sit motionless most of the time. So there it is down the bottom of the screen, just sitting there happily, blending into all those rocks. And in a moment, you're going to see what they look like today. I filmed this last month at the last conservatory. So 8 years old now, and that little guy is now about 80 centimetres long. And just an amazing fish to see swimming around the bottom. And as you can see, I've dove down and you can get quite close to them. They don't care too much. They'll just mosey off, are not too concerned about you at all. So if you're ever swimming in the lake, you'll very rarely see those from the surface because of their dark colour, and they'll be usually hiding in weeds. But if you get a snorkel and mask and have a swim around, you'll usually spot one. Quite amazing. They do come up to breathe every now and then. So if you're really lucky and you're sort of sitting on the shore quietly, you might actually see it come up and breathe. Next slide. So what does Lake Gkula have to do with helping these guys in the wild? Well, the key thing for lungfish is their breeding habitat, and I mentioned that with the plants earlier, the eelgrass or the ribbonweed. Without that plant or other plants like it, you won't get lungfish breeding in the wild. And so it's their preferred plant. It's most commonly distributed plant in the region, so it's very abundant where it occurs. But there's been some problems with that plant. And I just wanted to highlight, next slide, how important this plant is and other plants just to lungfish alone. It's not just because they like to live in it or breed in it, it's every part of their life history is dependent on this plant. So they breed, they lay their eggs in there. The little small lungfish actually live in those plants until they're large enough to not be sort of a snack for everything that lives in the river. They eat some of the plants as well as all the animals, snails and shrimps that live in those plants. So without that plant, if there's none of that plant in the river, these lungfish really struggle. They certainly can't breed and they start to suffer. So it's very, very critical for them. Next slide. So the question is, well, what's the problem? What's going on with the plants? So in the rivers around here, they generally still occur pretty well, but below large dams, and you might be familiar in this catchment, we have Somerset Dam and Wivenhoe Dam. Below those dams, the plants don't recover very, very easily on their own. And it's because the floods that come through the catchment sort of scour away all those plants, as you would have noticed after, say, the 2011-22 type floods. It just disturbs everything, rips it all out, and then it's got to regrow on its own. And that's where the problem lies, is below dams that natural regrowth process is blocked or hindered. And so that's why we have to do something about it. Next slide. So this... so we really have to bring those plants back for the lungfish and other fish as well, and other animals, turtles and things, because of this problem of dams blocking this natural recovery. Eventually it'll recover, but it'll take many decades, so we've got to give it a helping hand. This is just a diagram of what I'm talking about. There's two sides to this picture. The left side with all the green dots, that's the river upstream of Wivenhoe Dam, and that's a survey we did a year or so ago where we paddled down the river and actually mapped all the patches of plants that occurred in the river. And you can see there's plenty of green dots there, some fairly large dots showing large patches of plants. But the right-hand side plot below Wivenhoe Dam, you can barely even see those dots. There's 2 or 3 very small dots, and that's what I'm talking about, is the upstream river got flooded and scoured just as badly as downstream did, but there's hardly any recovery downstream. So that's what we're trying to do, is understand why that happens and what we can do about fixing that problem. Next slide. And that's where Lake Gkula really comes into this story, because we're using plants from Lake Gkula to help with this recovery project. Next slide. So the first year we tried this out, we didn't really know what was the best way to do it. So we thought we'd try the sort of turf approach where, you know, you buy some turf on a roll and you put it on the ground and it just grows. So we actually grew this plant on jute mat tiles, so just little squares of coconut fibre tiles. We grew the plants for about a year on that matting, and then we brought it to the river and planted it in the river. Next slide. So that's pretty much what we had, is we had trays of plants, just like you'd see trays of seedlings around today. We had trays of this this plant growing on these mats, and we just used shovels in our hands to put these things on the ground, put a few rocks on them, and hope for the best. Unfortunately, it didn't work. So within about 2 weeks of us putting about 40 square metres of plants, so, you know, an area about the size of this stage, they all got eaten. So all of these mats that we put out there had been eaten. You can see on the back of the vehicle there, you've got the mat, what it looked like when we put it out, covered in this eelgrass, and afterwards completely demolished. There was not hardly a plant left except for a few that survived under rocks. So we're sort of saying, what's doing this? Like, who's the culprit here? And we sort of first thought, well, could it be lungfish? We're not really sure. We hadn't seen them doing it, but something had eaten them all. So we had to redo this project again. And we thought, well, we've got to somehow protect these plants. So we collected some plants from Lake Gkula and we set up a bunch of kids' pools out near the dam and just planted it in there and let it grow so it fully filled those pools. So we had lots of plants to go and replant into the river, which is what we did, and we had plenty of plants to work with. So we then went back to the river and thought, how can we put these in the river and protect them? So that's what we did next year. We actually created fenced, protected plots in the river, just put up some bird mesh on some stakes so nothing could get to our plants, and it worked really well. The plants grew really fast. In about 2 or 3 months, they fully grew and covered the ground in those fenced areas, and we thought, great. This is how we'll grow them. We'll protect them until they're fully grown and then we'll take the fences away. Unfortunately, in our second year trial in 22, we had the 22 floods, which pretty much took out all of our planting work. But we kind of thought, okay, this seems to be working. We can grow these plants pretty easily. So we went to a third year where we did pretty much the same, but we increased the amount of area that we planted. So if we just click again, you'll see a little time-lapse video of the guys planting the plants into the soil in the river. Most of those plants came from Lake Gkula because we used all of our plants in the previous year. So when we're talking about plants, we're only talking about a few garbage bagfuls because there's a lot of individual plants that we just stick in the ground and they spread from there. And so that worked really well. Same thing happened. They grew really fast inside the plots. But the project that was being run this year was a part of a PhD student's project, and he wanted to just open up little sections of the fencing to see what would happen. And as soon as he opened up those fences, the plants got eaten again. In about 2 weeks, they fully ate all of those plants whenever the fences were removed. And we were still questioning, like, why is this happening? What's going on? So we started putting some cameras out. And as soon as we did, this is what we found. If you just click again, you'll see the video roll. That's an underwater camera at night time showing a lungfish sneaking in and taking mouthfuls of our plants. And just every night, lungfish would come in. The picture on the left there is a little section of one of these plots that he opened up with a little divider fence just to see if, say, only half of the plot would get eaten or not. And you can see where he opened it up, there's 3 lungfish sitting there, not a piece of plant right next to them on the fence. The plants are still going fine. So it sort of led us to believe that lungfish were doing most of the damage for sure, but on those videos we saw other animals like turtles and other fish coming in and having a bit of a browse, but these guys would just sit there all night, chewing away, eating all these plants. So we didn't give up at that stage. We wanted to keep trying to figure out a way to grow these plants in the river because they're so important, and just by the fact that these lungfish are devouring them when we put them in there, they're obviously really desperate for these plants. So we went again with a new approach. We wanted to plant these plants in the very shallow edges, and the idea was if it was too shallow for these big lungfish to come into, the plants would grow, they wouldn't all get eaten, and they'd spread from there. So we did that. We planted it, again, using plants from Lake Gkula. We come here, we collected a few garbage bags full, took them back here, planted them in the river, and they grew great again. Unfortunately, in 24, we had that minor flooding, and it didn't destroy the plants this time. What actually happened is the water level got up high enough that it enabled the lungfish to swim over the fences and get into our plants. So the same thing happened. They just ate the lot. And when the guys were out there inspecting these plots in that dirty water, they were actually tripping over lungfish because they'd come in and were eating our plants. So the story is it's probably not all bad, because the thing is lungfish live upstream as well in the river, and those plants are recovering on their own. So we had to try and figure out what's going on. And what we thought was happening was that while they were disturbing our nice fresh planted plots that we put in areas where they could get to, some of those plants were drifting downstream, and that's what we were finding, is these little plants were occurring in little back pockets of the river in shallow areas and starting to grow. So we thought, well, let's extend on that. It's happening naturally upstream without any of our intervention at all. Let's try and copy that process downstream. So our next trial, which we started last year, was a process we called managed hydrochory. And hydrochory is just a fancy word for the natural drift of plants down the river. And so we came in, that's my fancy AI image there of the concept. We came in and we just pretty much chucked a bunch of plants into the river and let them drift down on their own and take care of themselves. And that's what Colin, the PhD student, studied, is whether that was going to work or not. So we didn't have to build the fences, we didn't have to repair them. That was the other thing. Every 3 or 4 months we'd have to come in and repair them to stop fish breaking through or the rust causing the fences to break away. And the fact that we were able to source these plants from the lake enabled us to do these types of projects, because the river, we didn't want to go upstream and take plants from there because they're recovering on their own. We didn't want to just keep stealing those plants. So it was really fortunate that while we're controlling the plants in the river here for swimmers, we could use those plants to recover the wild habitat in the river below the dam. What else did I want to say there? We'll move on from there. So what the next slide shows is Colin. He's there in the middle. Pretty much, instead of these nice fancy fence plots and all the hand planting that we did, which took weeks of work, he just stood there and pretty much scattered them into the river and let them drift down on their own. We put a few things in the river, like we banged in some wooden stakes and things to trap the plants, so the plants would drift past and hit the stake and they'd stay put, in the hope it would speed up the establishment of those plants in the river. And it worked really well. So the first year of results from that project on the next slide, it's a little difficult to pick up, but the arrow shows the one spot that we released these plants, and all down the river are all these dots of where the plants have settled and started growing. And that was just after 3 months of the first trial. So we're doing a trial again this summer and next summer as well, and we'll be collecting more plants from the lake to do those trials as part of that project. And it's all part of us trying to control the plants around the swimming areas but use them for this beneficial use here. Next slide. That's just a few pictures of the different life stages of lungfish. The eggs on the left there are quite large eggs, about the size of a small garden pea. And then the little tiny hatchlings, so you can imagine how sort of defenceless those little guys are without that habitat. So in summary, we just want to go through these points here. That rehabilitation of the plants in the river below the dams is really critical, because on its own it's not recovering very fast, certainly not as fast as the upstream river does. So while there's no plants, lungfish don't get to breed, they don't have a lot to eat, so it's really important we speed up that recovery. And without that habitat, lungfish suffer. fortunately for them, they live a long time, so they can wait. And it's so important that we can source plants from not within the natural river, but here at Lake Gkula to do that project. And so just a closing comment before a sort of a couple of other images I wanted to show was just how incredible it is that people get to experience lungfish in Lake Gkula, considering just how special they are. The fact that these things were around at the time of dinosaurs and have hardly changed since that time, and the fact that they are so reliant on having a healthy river, and that how important the lake is in helping those fish in the wild. So I just wanted to try and encourage you, if you ever get the chance, to put your head underwater in the lake, because the world under there is so different to what you see from above. It's just full of life, full of fish, and those lungfish swimming around in there, which are just amazing to spot when you get a chance. And you don't always see them, but you do see them often enough that if you spend a bit of time in the water, you will eventually spot them. And I just wanted to finish on a short video that Patrick from Waterscapes Australia produced on the lake. It's just a nice little video that shows it's being built and right through to current day, what it looks like. Just on the last slide, so part of this work involves part of my actual job at Seqwater, but I just wanted to thank a whole bunch of people, and particularly Woodfordia, because of their support for this work that we're doing to try and recover the habitat in the wild by using the plants out of the lake. So that's my talk for today, so thanks to everyone for coming. I have a couple of stickers here that people can go and grab. One is I love lungfish, so there's not too many of those. The other one is I love Neoceratodus forsteri, which is the scientific name for it. So those who like a little bit of science geeks, maybe you'll want to try and grab one of those. But feel free to come up and grab a sticker. There's a handful of them there if you want one. Thanks, everyone. We've got a little bit of time, do we? Yeah, a little bit of time if anyone wants to ask a couple of questions or not, so feel free. Yeah, I saw the hand first.
So you said that the lungfish comes up to the air. How often or how many minutes does it take for them
To do that?
Yeah.
So the environment's so clean and healthy and oxygenated in the lake, they don't really need to do that very often, but they still probably do it every couple of hours. So you'd have to be very patient, particularly early in the morning. So the more active they are, the more they'll come up to breathe air because they are using energy. So early morning is usually the best time to spot them because it's before the lake gets a bit busy with swimmers, and you can they'll be swimming around and every now and then they'll come up for a bit of a breath. So it's just a bit of luck as to whether one's going to come up for you on the day that you're sitting there waiting to see them. Yeah. Ah, yes. Yeah, okay. Yes, sorry.
Just asking if they're already breeding in the lake, or is it just
Good question. Yeah, the question was about are the lungfish breeding in the lake. Potentially they could breed in the lake. So with all that plant material, the underwater weed, they could potentially breed in there. Because they're such a long-lived fish, they don't become mature for about 15, 20 years. So they're only 8 years old now, so they're still sort of not even teenagers. So there's quite a while to wait before potentially, but quite possibly that could happen, yes.
I was fortunate enough to be here when there was no one here, and I was swimming and snorkeling. I found one in a lovely sandy pit, and we floated for about an hour together.
Yeah.
Sunbaking, I was thinking that's what she was doing, and I saw two smaller ones. So I see three at once. How many are there?
There are 3. So there are 3 in there. So yeah, you're very lucky. I don't think I've ever seen 3 in one day. So so there are 3 in there, and that's great to hear that because sometimes you're never quite sure if the 3 have survived because you don't see 3 in one go. So
Sunbaking and absorbing, like it was really nice in the water.
yeah. Yeah, they like sort of morning and afternoon. During the heat of the day, they try and hide from the sun, so they'll sort of bury themselves into the weed and any shade. So, but morning and afternoon, they like to come out and eat and forage around.
And she was much bigger than the other.
Other 2, yeah.
She or she?
Too hard to know. Yeah, no, there's no real easy way to know until they are mature and until they're sort of in season. And the only real way to know is if eggs or milt comes out of them when they're sort of...
Does the environment change them to create the sex that they need?
Not that we know of, no. In the wild, it's pretty 50-50, so pretty much half-half of male-female. So we don't think there's sort of too much that affects that difference. So out of 3, you might get lucky and have 2 of one sex and 1 of the other. So yeah, it's a bit of pot luck, but we just don't know. Yeah, just behind there, yeah. Yes, so the gentleman was asking about how hard is the plant to grow and could you, on your own bat, replant it? Yes, it's easy to grow. It's one of the easiest plants to grow of all the aquatic plants. You just need a pond, a bit of gravel in the bottom, and it'll grow just fine. And there's no reason why you couldn't do that if you wanted to. As long as you source the plant from the location where you wanted to put it, so you'd get it from this catchment, you wouldn't go and get it from somewhere else. And there's various reasons for that. Could be a different plant species, unlikely, but you could have hitchhikers and other things you don't want. So you just be really careful in doing that. Yeah, because we're in the Brisbane catchment. So yeah, and they were originally, the plants originally put in here came from here. So yeah, they're the same plants. And as long as nothing else is growing in the lake that's not, which is not likely, because essentially this lake is closed system. Nothing comes in and nothing comes out, except what we do, so what we put in and take out. So it's quite unique like that. But yeah, it's a very easy plant. And other projects that we're doing, so with natural resource management groups that do things like riparian planting and erosion control, they're incorporating a bit of replanting aquatic plants in their projects, just recognising that all those extra helping hands do help a lot. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the question was, should we have, say, project with people getting involved in growing this plant? It probably isn't really necessary. Like I said, there's so much of that plant growing in the lake, and one of the projects we have in conservatory is trying to manage that plant so it doesn't interfere with the recreational use of the lake. So there's more than enough that we're harvesting out of that lake to do these types of projects. So it's probably not necessary. And it'll always be there. It's not like it's going to seasonally die off and come back. So even if the next flood comes along and we have to restart all this re-veg, we can easily source plenty of material from here. But it's not out of the question to do something like that.
Are there citizen science projects that we can be involved in to help lungfish?
Potentially, yes. And maybe coming along to the Lake Lovers pod and having a bit of a chat and getting involved could be part of that. So we're continuing this work for another couple of years of replanting the river. So there's always potential to get involved in that stuff. Yeah. Yeah. That's an often question that's asked, is how many lungfish could we put in the lake to eat all of the plants? You probably wouldn't want to do that, because then they'll have nothing to eat and you're going to have to do something with hungry lungfish. So, if you had probably 20 in there, they'd probably eat all the plants, but then you'd have 20 hungry lungfish. So there's only 3 in there in the moment. There is potential we could add a couple more, but we probably wouldn't want to go too much further than that, just because we want them to be healthy and have plenty of plants to live off. We might have to wrap it up in a minute, but we'll take 1 or 2 more. If we didn't put anything in there after it was built, there'd be no fish in there. No fish and no plants, because they can't get in there anyway. So we had to put all those plants and fish in there to create that environment. So you might have seen in the video there was a segment there where you could just see gravel everywhere, and people were sitting there planting, just like people are doing today, planting trees everywhere. We had working bees planting all of the aquatic plants into the lake after it was built. So that they grew like they are today. Most lakes have got a river or something connected to them, so they live in the rivers, the catchments, whereas this has it's an artificial lake, so it has no natural river attached to it. So that's usually how lakes get fish and plants. There could have been a few plants come in on ducks, seeds. Ducks eat the seeds of plants and poo them out, so a few plants would have eventually got in there. But without plants and fish, the ecosystem wouldn't be in balance, and you'd probably end up with quite a sort of green pond kind of scummy sort of environment, which wouldn't be very pleasant. So the plants help keep it really fresh and clean. So it was important we put them all in there to create what the lake is today. Yes.
What's your hunch as to why the dams are blocking the downstream regrowth?
So the student, Colin, who's been working on this for 3 years, has studied a lot of what might be going on, and basically what we think is happening is the dam is so big that all of the natural plants drifting down from the upper catchment, the seeds and the roots and everything, are just getting trapped in the dam and they don't go downstream. Add to that, when you have a flood, it removes all of the seeds in the soil, and it relies on new seeds coming down, like sediment moving from there to there. Whereas with the dam, it catches all that, and so there's no replenishment happening. So the project we're doing is starting plants growing below the dam, so that then it starts spreading all them seeds and plants down the river as it would naturally have happened. Yeah, so we're not trying to plant the whole river with plants, we're just putting them in places where they'll spread and recover on their own. Well, I think we should wrap it up there. So thanks very much for everyone coming.